everyone for being here this morning, my time, and I know we're in different places, so happy day wherever you are. See, there's Northern Ireland, Ireland. It's not morning there. Um, and happy to be with you. Again, these monthly webinars a month goes by quickly, it seems to me, at least this time of year. And here we are again. Yeah, so looking forward to giving you an update on just my beekeeping and my journey with my farm this year, as well as kind of what's happening in general this time of year with the bees, which we'll all, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, are sharing some of that same pattern, right? The timing's off a little bit. And then we're going to get into the second half, which is I'm excited about, which is our honey story feature. We've talked about it before, but we're gonna go into it a little more detail, and give you some examples, some inspiration really for how you might go about doing a honey story. And then Lowell, which another role that Lowell has is he's frontline support for Hive Tracks. So I expect that he has solved a problem for you or helped you in some way out there if you're a Hive Tracks user and have sent in a support request. And he does a fantastic job with that. And so he knows the ins and outs of everything. And so he's going to walk us through creating a honey story. And then I inserted one piece that last minute, this honey authentication primer. I want to give a little bit of context and motivation for where this whole honey story idea came from. And it's one that I'll get into it more, but it's pretty near and dear to me, honey authentication, and just create some of the uh, landscape of why this came about and what we're trying to accomplish with the honey story for you as a beekeeper. So, all right, let's get going with an update. And again, pop questions into the chat. We'll see them there, and answer them as we're able at the end. So for Faith Mountain Farm update, if you've been tracking with us, you know that I'm in a rebuild year with my farm post Helene, Hurricane Helene flood. And so we've just been given an update here of how that's going. And our August weather, which I think a lot of the eastern seaboard was this way, was pretty wet. And a little bit cooler, just not the hot, dry August weather that you're used to. That being said, nectar flow definitely was still, August is typically a dearth where I am. You're beginning to get into the fall flowers, but they haven't really kicked in yet. So it was kind of a typical from that perspective, but it was super wet and not as hot as we expected it to be. Current hive count, I'm sitting at about 50. I made some new splits, had some dead outs along the way, so they're kind of evening out. As far as my operational events or tasks that I'm doing, I'm still extracting honey. I've been a little bit slow in that extraction. And just a note for, I mean, anybody who's kept bees for very long, you know that when you pull honey, you typically want to extract that pretty quickly, just because of pests, whether it's small hive beetle, which I don't have a problem with, but wax moth is definitely an issue. And if you have any comb that's been used for brood that's also then turned into a honey super, you have a big risk of the wax moth kind of getting a foothold in that. So just a reminder, don't let that honey sit in the supers very long before you extract it. Um, Also, as far as the bees go, checking queen status, I did some treatments early in the month with formic acid. Given my elevation and cooler temperatures, I was able to do that even in the summer. And just following up, make sure that those queens were back laying like they should. And it turns out, I think a lot of people kind of in our area, North Carolina, were able to use formic where they might not be able to in the past, just because the temperature was much cooler. But the main thing we're checking for this time of year, as the population is drawing down and our minds and the bees, the colonies, collective attention is going towards winter and winter prep. And so, what's the space look like? They're drawing down the population. You're harvesting honey. You want to get that space to be kind of right there with the colony size. They're not going to grow typically unless you're kind of artificially stimulating that. And along with that is just the food source. So both your nectar and your pollen, you want to make sure that they've got plenty of resources. It's not going to hinder their growth going into or reproduction really of the winter bees that are coming up. Other things that are going on that we've been tracking with, I've told you about this pollinator patch that we're part of a grant program through NC State, and that's blooming well, and they're coming periodically to check the pollinators that are visiting. They're collecting a whole bunch of data on the type of pollinator that's visiting, the plant that pollinator is visiting. So we should have a good thing to point to there as far as pollinators, and this is at the farm property. Um, for me, where I live in the northwest corner of North Carolina, we are transitioned. Last time I said we're heading towards this, but we're definitely there now. All the fall flowers are going. It's just yellow everywhere, pretty much. In this picture, the random on a farm, you have random volunteer plants. That was a pumpkin that just volunteered and got ready early, and so it's just sitting on some equipment. But you can kind of tell from the flowers and things, and just the that it is a fall transition that's going on. So ironweed, Joe Pye weed, goldenrod is just beginning. In the hives, you're seeing the pollen, and I'll have some pictures here in a moment just to illustrate this. That the pollen in the fall, at least in my area, it's these bright yellows and oranges, and it's just very distinctive from other times of the year. You can tell when they're just shifting into those fall flowers. And the other thing for my area, we goldenrod and asters, those are kind of your fall potential nectar. Um, some people, maybe Japanese knotweed is another one potential. And for where I am, those typically start, even though the goldenrod can bloom beginning in July, and there are so many varieties of goldenrod. It's very difficult to tell the difference between them. But the ones that produce nectar that show up in a hive for me, typically the first week of September or so. But from what I'm seeing, that might be delayed a little bit. So that's what's going on with my operation and my farm. I got a few pictures here to look at, and the next one, Danny, if you go to this was a a a story I wanted to tell about this hive, and this is again one reason that you want to inspect your hives on a regular basis. This particular location has really had horrible honey flow this year. I mean, they've all of the honey flows for this particular site have just not happened this year, and so I went in early August and was expecting, just to find the normal hive. I knew they didn't have a lot of nectar flow, but I was not expecting what I found. And they were almost completely dry. The hive was, I mean, of everything. No, no nectar, no pollen, no stores, no nothing. And they were very close to starving to death. And the picture on the left here is they had kind of emptied out on the front. It was warm as well, so that's part of it. But many of these bees that you see right here were already dead. The others were just lethargic and just laying there. And I went so far as I just sprinkled nectar or sugar water over top of these, and they revived pretty quickly. And you can see on the right, I put a top feeder, probably 2 gallons of feed in that. And so again, the argument is to make sure that you're, monitoring closely, and in times where, there might be a dearth. And in this case, it was really just this location. There were others nearby that had nectar, but not sure what was happening in this kind of local ecosystem that was doing that. But if you go to the next slide, this was yesterday, that same hive. After I fed them, they just rebounded beautifully. I mean, if you look at these frames of brood, those are, very nice frames of brood. And thank goodness I got there at the right time and they were able to recover. So again, monitoring the food is super important. And you can, even in the summer, you can have a hive that will starve to death. And that hive, again, I pulled zero honey from that hive. It was just the circumstances around that were such that they just didn't have enough nectar out in in their surroundings. All right. Next slide. So this one here is to remind you to make sure you take pictures of your pollinators and your flowers as part of your hive tracks. Record keeping. And secondly, that zinnias are such an easy flower that everybody should have a zinnia patch. One of my beekeeping friends made a post the other day and talking about zinnias and how super easy they are. And they just attract a wide variety of pollinators, especially a lot of butterflies. So if you're making plans for next year or thinking about what you should grow, zinnias are a great example for that. All right, so that's kind of a glimpse into the James Faith Mountain Farm B side, but let's zoom out a little bit and look at kind of in general what's happening. Last time we said we're about to transition. Now we are transitioning fully to winter mode. And one lens to view that through is that the colony is getting ready to transition the bees, and you'll see some posts about, on the socials and things of winter bees. And this is a long-lived bee, is another way to say that. And these are the bees that are going to live through the winter. Okay, so the bees that are in the summer, they're short-lived bees. They essentially wear themselves out in, 35 or 40 days of activity. But in the winter, they're not going out and foraging, and they have even a different physiology possible, so that as it's raising those winter bees, the winter bees are healthy and they're plentiful. And so again, that's the best way to go through the winter. Did I go away for a minute?
Just a minute. Yeah.
Okay. My,
15
my,
seconds.
my Zoom said you're unstable. So, all right.
We can hear.
I'm back. Okay. All right. So, in general, we are at this time of year want our bees as healthy as possible to create those winter populations and give us the best chance of going through the winter successfully. All right. So, for the southern U.S., you should be completing your final harvest now. You Fall flows are usually pretty finicky, so you don't want to rely on them. And so outside of that, you should be have all the honey off, finishing your extraction, do something for varroa management. The sooner the better to get those numbers under control. And as I said, space management, draw the space down just to where your overwinter configuration. Now, there are some questions about single brood management, and in those scenarios, it might be that you need an extra super for part of the fall before you go all the way down. But in general, you want to get the space as tight as possible. And as I said, food management, and that's pollen and nectar. One note on that, and that's the last bullet here. When you are managing the fall colony, if you happen to have a really strong nectar flow or pollen flow, you can get bound by food. Your colony can get bound by the food, honey bound or pollen bound. Sometimes in the fall, they just go crazy with pollen and just stuff way more pollen than they're going to need, and it reduces the space for where the queen can lay. So again, uh, we tend to overfeed, I think, a lot of times, worrying about them having enough food for winter, but the opposite can happen as well. So don't just overfeed so that they stuff the whole brood nest with nectar or pollen. You need that queen to have space so that she can lay for the winter bees. Um, in the northern U.S., Canada, the transition there is much faster, and so you should definitely be uh, way ahead, already done with Varroa, all the honey collection, etc., and be getting ready for winter prep. I know the friends I have in Saskatchewan. I mean, by the end of September, early October, they are done and all wrapped and ready for the winter and kind of put them to bed. So you just have to accelerate your plan for that area. And I'm putting another plug in here. I have this bullet pretty much every every time. Consult the Honeybee Health Coalition. I think their resources are one of the best, most solid, consistent sources of information for Varroa management and how to think about the Varroa. So, all right, so that's what's happening. Hopefully, you're doing these things or have done these things, and these are just reminders to make sure that you are. And of course, keep your good records with Hive tracks. All right, so what's next, Danny? I think I had some pictures, maybe.
You do. There's a couple of questions that have come in. I don't know if you want to answer them while we're on
Okay.
the topic, James. So when do you plant zinnia seeds? Is this usually after the last
Oh,
frost? What's your approach?
yeah, Xenia, yeah. In the spring after last frost is typically good. Some people start them, inside and then transplant. I just direct sow and they work beautifully. Yeah. I see the other one. Did I only have one hive in that starvation zone? No, there were two hives in that spot and they both were in that same state. So it wasn't the colony not doing its job. It's just something weird in that space. Yeah. All
Okay.
right.
Next slide.
So I wanted to give an example of what that pollen in the fall looks like. You can see how yellow and orange they are. This slide on the left is this frame is getting packed out with the fall pollen that we have. By the way, nectar in the fall, at least where I am, the goldenrod and aster, everybody knows that it has a really kind of pungent smell when they're making uh, that honey in your yard, and it has a almost a dirty gym sock smell is what it smells like. You can walk into a bee yard. If you smell that, you know that they're making this goldenrod and aster honey. And the wax itself with that is a very yellow tinted color. It's very interesting. But anyway, this is typically what the pollen looks like. Again, in my area, it probably looks different in yours. Now the picture on the right, I want you to look carefully if you haven't. But you see the pollen, the cells right next to the pollen. If you look in there, do you see the eggs? I mean, the queen has laid right up next to this pollen band, which is not unusual, but just shows that it's a pretty tight space in there, and the queen is going right up next to that pollen. And so again, the caution to make sure that you leave enough space for her to lay. All right, next slide. So here's a couple of other kind of pictures from the last month. The one on the left, this was, look at all those queen cells. And you can see they're torn down. Some clearly a queen emerged from it. This was in a hive that I purposely made go queenless in sourwood, kind of as an experiment for honey production. If they're queenless during honey production, they'll make more honey and not be worrying about brood and that sort of thing. But anyway, I thought it was kind of neat picture with all of these queen cells in this one emergency cells. You can kind of tell in this spot. And that one, there's even a bee in there that is one of the queens that was killed in the process. Then the one on the right, this is treating a hive. This is apivar strips that have gone in. I use some formic and some apivar if they're not if I don't think it's as heavy an infestation or Varroa load, then I'll use apivar just to knock back the numbers. So again, a couple of pictures from the last month. All right. I think that brings us to the next segment. Um, let's see. Okay. Question on how do you decide what frames to remove altogether? That's a good question. The only time I would remove frames is if they were I don't know, in the way if you had too much honey in there and you needed a little bit more space to lay, or pollen, the same thing. Um, or I might take, and this happens sometimes on new hives, like I noticed the other day on some packages or splits that I've started, they never went to that outside frame. So I might pull, and so it was empty. So I might pull that out and replace it actually with a food frame. And so there is some, adjusting of resources. I tend to leave it like they have it because they're smarter than me. But if there's something clear like that where they need more food, then I'll do that. All right, so let's go to this next segment, and I, as I said, I want to give a kind of preface to the honey story. And this concept of honey authentication, one might ask, why is this even a problem? And I'll address that in the next slide. But here's the definition of honey. And here's the US definition. The EU definition is pretty similar. It has some references to pollen in it as well in the definition. But it seems pretty straightforward. It's what bees produce, right? Um, and so it wouldn't seem that that's very complicated, that you would be able to have authentic honey. That by definition, this is what comes from bees, what they make. There's a little piece in there that's a little interesting nuance, from the nectar of plants or from secretions of living parts of plants. Okay. And so some are nectar, some are, other sweet substances, that you might get. So it seems like a pretty straightforward definition, but there's a problem with honey authentication. So let's go to the next slide. And yes, honeydew is the other one. Um, is this a problem? And I would, in my uh, almost 20 years of producing honey and selling honey and be engaged with the honey beekeeping space. And for the past 12 plus years at the international level, going to apimondia conferences, things like that, that is this jar of honey really honey is a ubiquitous question that doesn't always have a good answer. You can't always authenticate the honey, and it's not an isolated problem. It's spans the geography of the globe, and it spans the scale of beekeeper from the smallest backyard beekeeper to the biggest commodity level honey producer. And there are various reasons for that. The biggest one is it's just easy to put something in a jar and put a label on it that says honey. Okay. And it's difficult, a bit difficult to authenticate that, to say, to validate that that is real. Okay. And it has got attention from Apimondia. Every year that I go to Apimondia, there's a whole day or sessions on honey authentication and honey adulteration, and what are we going to do about it, right? At my local farmers market, okay, my farmers market requires producers to produce the product that they sell, okay? So I'm required, the honey that I sell, that has to be mine, which is, different than any other honey that outside you can, I can take honey and repackage it from my buddy and sell it. That's a normal sort of process in the beekeeping world. And that's one reason that it's hard to monitor, it's hard to validate, it's hard to know where the honey comes from. And for me in particular, with sourwood honey, you've heard me talk about it if you've listened to the webinars or any of my socials. That's part of my farm business, is making sourwood. We live in an area where sourwood honey has historically been produced. It's a unique varietal honey, and a lot of people, either wittingly or nefariously, put a label on a jar and call it sourwood honey when it's not sourwood honey. And so it's a very personal issue to me to deal with honey authentication and make sure that honey is what you say it is. Okay. Um, and it turns out that the bottom line is that when and where honey is made is really the definition of what's in that honey, because um, it's made at a particular place at a particular time so that there's a particular set of flowers that are blooming, they're producing nectar, and that what honey is made in that window of time at that place is what's in the honey, right? It seems pretty straightforward. But that's not how we determine what's in the honey. There are different mechanisms that are downstream from that we try to use, including lab tests. And I'm going to go through a quick sort of list of what that looks like in a moment as well. But my point here is that this is a global problem. It's one that people have wrestled with. It's very difficult. Just millions and millions of dollars and man hours have gone into trying to authenticate honey, make sure that the honey that a consumer buys is actually honey to begin with, and that it's is what it says on the label. Okay. It seems like a simple problem, but it's not a simple problem, and it's one that people have been wrestling with. And the honey story, we believe and have a vision that that's a tool that you as a beekeeper can use to differentiate your honey from the other honeys that are out there, and it gives you control over, telling the story about your honey. Okay. There are also other various mechanisms out there for certifications. Almost each state, I know North Carolina has a certified North Carolina honey. Texas has one. Probably your state has something that they want to promote. It's a kind of regional promotion of, our honey industry. Countries have this. Manuka is a, kind of the international standard for that. And those are only as good as the organizing bodies and the participants and that sort of thing. So they have value, but they also have limitations on guarantees. And then there's formal honey testing methods. So let's go ahead and go to that next slide. Um, uh, and so honey testing, and this is, essentially lab testing type things. Some of this you do yourself as a beekeeper. A lot of folks, will test the moisture content of your honey, just to make sure that it's not going to ferment. If you don't have that test, then you rely on the honey being capped before you harvest it. You're depending on the bees' sense of moisture content in that case. But that's kind of the first level of testing that's done. But then there's a whole long list of ways of testing honey in a lab to either test that it's actually honey. Okay, so is it adulterated with other sugars? There's a whole industry that's built around adulterating honey with other sugars that are cheaper to produce, with the idea of, making cheaper honey that they can make more money, et cetera, et cetera. There's a Netflix documentary. It's getting a little dated in terms of when it was made. A documentary called Rotten. If you haven't seen it, the first episode of it is about honey and honey adulteration. And it does a really good job of talking about this large scale, commodity level honey adulteration, how that happens, transshipping, all this kind of international sort of games that are played with honey. And so these tests are designed to kind of combat that. When you're importing honey, there are certain tests that are done to, again, just validate the integrity of the honey that's coming in, its moisture content, the sugar, if it has kind of foreign sugars in it. It also tests for, contaminants. Is it clean honey that's coming in? Does it have heavy metals or pesticides or herbicides or things like that? Again, just kind of a food safety sort of level of test. There's now additional layers that are trying to determine the nectar sources of that honey. Okay, so what is in this honey? Is this sourwood honey? Is this manuka honey? Is this acacia honey? And so NMR, DNA testing, pollen analysis, all of these are different methods that are trying to get at that truth. Okay, so that we can accurately label the honey or know that what we're buying is what the label says. And there's varying, we should do a whole webinar on this. I'm pretty passionate about it. But it gets in the weeds, and we can nerd out on all the different kind of layers of data that you can have to validate the honey and authenticate the honey. But there is a lot of cost to that, and the speed of which you can do DNA testing in particular, and errors and consistencies. For example, sourwood honey has a super low pollen content, which when it is fed into European standards. It almost doesn't even meet the pollen content requirement for the definition of honey in the EU. So, but we know it's real honey. I mean, it came from, we produced it, and so there are limitations to the honey testing, but it is another layer of data that you might use if it's of value to you. All right, I think maybe I have. Do I have another one? Okay, so when you get honey from your hive, next slide, you take it to the farmer's market, you talk to people, there's a trust that you've built there with them, right? I mean, that's how um, you can convince somebody that this is my honey. I can tell you where it was made, I can show you where it was made. And so there's this trust that's created at this farmer's market level. And really our goal with Honey Story is to export that trust through your honey story. Be able to take that conversation that you could have at the farmer's market and put it into digital space. That's kind of my vision for it. So next slide, Danny. Um, so then you end up with a QR code on your honey that, if I'm not there and I can't have the conversation, the QR code can take you somewhere where you can have that conversation digitally. All right. So I think let's go to the next. Yeah. So what do you need to do? Keep good records, use the honey stories. It gives you a tool as a beekeeper you are in control of the story of your honey, and it gives you a way of communicating all the cool stuff about your operation, about your honey, and to help your friends, your family. And I think Danny's going to talk about this. I'm not stealing her content here, but anyway, let's move on to the actual honey story part. And you can skip over this one. This was one I had in the last one. This was one of my honey stories from this season. But let's go to your stuff, Danny.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, James. Yeah, so I will be here to explain a little bit more about the honey story. Um, Maybe a quick pulse check to start with. Who's already made a honey story in HiveTracks Pro? You can let us know in the chat if you have. So Lynn has already. Fantastic. Great to hear it, Lynn. Let us know if you have created one already. Otherwise, we can kind of go through. James provided a fantastic context to kind of the vision of what instigated the feature of Honey Stories. But Honey Stories is one of our most popular features in HiveTracks Pro, which is kind of the extended version of the free HiveTracks mobile app. Of course, it's available on a desktop only. So there's a bunch of other features in there. It's really there if you want to dig a little bit deeper into the data and see your trends and see all your records kind of visualized in a bigger format. There's also groups functionality, but the Honey Story is definitely one of the most popular pieces within that, because I guess what James has echoed around the transparency piece within the honey market, but also because it's such a nice thing to be able to share after all your hard work at the end of the season or during the season, or whenever you choose to, really. So the Honey Story is also really exciting. It is available. The Honey Story link itself that we're talking about is kind of like the standalone website, web link that you can share about your honey specifically. And this can be viewed on mobile devices, desktop, iPad, and everything. So it's a really exciting moment in the history of the honey story as well, because it's had a bit of a refresh. So you will have noticed overnight and for the rest of the week as well, there'll be some aesthetic changes to the honey story that you see coming through. Kind of showcases your images and all the beautiful content that you have there to show a little bit more than in the first iteration. So this is what it looks like at the moment using one of James's honey stories as an example here. You have an opportunity to share your story itself, which is kind of the overarching background of your operations, your farm, whatever that may be, and then the individual harvest profile, which is everything specific to that actual harvest. The idea is that once you create the harvest, the honey story and the harvest profile within HiveTracks Pro, You can then publish it, and that's the shareable link that you can send around to your friends and family, customers, pop it on your honey jars website, have it in posters at the markets, kind of wherever you want to share that. As James mentioned, the floral source and geographic traceability is a big draw card for the honey story, and the authentication piece as well. We've partnered with Honey Trail, which is kind of an integration that allows the honey story also to be served in on the Hedera network, which is a blockchain kind of immutable ledger that kind of adds another layer of verification to the whole piece. That's optional, of course, but definitely something that we found beekeepers really use as an additional value add to their honey story, just to show that their customers or whoever that this is verified in that way. So that's it in a nutshell. That's kind of the mobile version of what it would look like when you share it. Again, it's just like your honey's own website, really. So you can make as many custom versions of these as you like. The individual components of them. So there's a little showcase on the honey. You get to upload exactly what kind of honey you've harvested, the plants, what your bees were eating on during that time, including a little flavor profile there. It includes the location and the records if you want the records to be shown as well, to again showcase probably all the hard work that you put into it. It's of course optional and you can choose what records are public and which aren't. But it's a nice little ad there, and of course the album, the photos that you can upload to celebrate what was done. As James showed as well, a picture of his actual jars. It just goes to show like you can pop your QR code on there or a link, and then just provide that immediate background. So it's a really great, in addition to a pride piece, it's just a really lovely marketing piece as well for people who are in beekeeping operations. Um, Here is just an example which Lowell will take you through in more depth, but just the level of customization that's available. So you can have as many harvest or as many honey stories and harvest profiles within that as you like. They can be endless. So you might want to have a specific one for, say, Thanksgiving or gifting or Christmas or something really tailored to your friends and family. And that might be completely different to what public information you might want to put on your jars for, say, for selling your honey. So you can really customize and have as many as you like to do that. This one's a case for Thanksgiving, and really customizing it to suit that. As I said, you can tailor them to suit your audience, and create as many as you like. So it's quite a lot of fun creating them. So for the rest of the webinar, until we get to maybe 5 or 10 minutes for the Q&A, Lola's going to take you through how to actually create a honey story in the Hive Tracks Pro app if you haven't done so already. It's super simple process, but one that is makes a lot more sense when you're going through it. So if you'd like to do it along with us, I highly recommend you to do so. You can just click on this link. I'm also going to pop it into the chat. Sign up for, if you're not already in Pro, you can sign up for a free 7-day trial, and that will get you through and you can create your honey story alongside us. Just make sure that you log in via your mobile app credentials so that everything will sync across pretty much immediately when you log in. And I'm going to stop sharing so Lowell can now share his screen.
Yeah, I should be sharing now, everyone. So I'm gonna walk us through just a quick run of making a honey story on your HiveTrax Pro account. So firstly, make sure you're signed in. To make the honey story, obviously you're gonna need an apiary, and it'd be great if you have some records too. My screen might look a little different than yours if you're on the honey store page on the left, just because I have two made. But you will have a pop-up prompt that says, "Would you like to make your first honey story?" And if you hit that, you'd be at the same place as me. So from here, I can do this plus sign and get started on my honey story. And so I'm gonna come up with a name for my honey story. I think for this example, I'm gonna kind of make it as if like I have a business that I'm gonna put these QR codes on, whether on jars or menus and shelves, just so people can connect and see my honey. Uh, and so for this one, I'm gonna name it for myself. I'm gonna name it Business Customer Engagement, so I know that this one's for this one when I share it on my HiveTrax account. So here you can put an about section, just information about yourself, about your honey, your apiaries, kind of where you're making it. So I'm gonna say I gathered mine from Hivecroft, Texas prairies and different ranch lands, and show that the honey reflects kind of the open field and wild biodiversity of my area. So here you put information on your city. I'll put San Antonio, and then I will put Texas, and then just a corresponding zip code. Country is going to be United States. And then here you can put your number of hives. I'm going to say I have three in mind. If you have your own personal website link, you can absolutely put that here. When people access your honey story, whether through the QR code or link, there's a section that says try website. So this can be in addition to your own website as a little thing just on an individual honey product. Or if you don't have a website, this can absolutely take that role as well. And so here you can add some photos. These can be more general photos of just your farm or your honey collection process. Uh, Later on, we have a section that's more specified to the actual honey and flowers you've collected. So I'm just gonna put a picture of my apiary, and then let's say a picture just of some beekeeping to show. And once I've hit saved, I now have this honey story. So now that you have your honey story, you can go ahead and make a harvest profile, which is your shareable example with everyone. So you hit this plus button, and then you can name your harvest profile. I'm going to name mine Texas Wildflower Blend. So from here, you'll select one of your honey stories. If you just made a honey story like I did, the only one that's going to pop up is the one you need. So you simply compress it here. And then here you can select your right apiaries. So since I have three different apiaries, I'm going to pick the ones that are right for me. So that's going to be my Lone Star apiaries. And then I saw in the chat someone asked about locations. You can absolutely hit approximate my location if you don't want your exact location given away for where your hives are or your apiary or farms are. Or if you're comfortable with that, you can hit this and you can go back and change this at any time. So I'm gonna hit approximate locations. And then here I can select any hives that I have or any records that I have attached. And then I can go ahead and create. So now that I've created this, I should be able to go to it. If you click on the name of the harvest profile here, that's highlighted in blue, this will all show up. So that's some of my information. And this is more of an editing screen. This isn't what people would see when they visit. You can scroll down and fill in more information. So for my harvest details, I can make up some information. I think my honey type would be prairie bloom honey. It's going to be from San Antonio. And then I'll just put the harvest date as today. Obviously, if you have a specific harvest date for your harvest that you're referencing, you can put that there. Put the amount here. I'll say I collected 35 pounds, and then I'll just make it easy and put this batch number one. There we go. And so you see this is a little map overview of your location. You can zoom out and just kind of get a rough idea. Since I just put San Antonio, it's going to just put somewhere in that city, not specific, but obviously you can be more specific if you'd like. And then here's one of the best parts, which is I think the forward source details. We can give a lot of information on your honey itself. So here you can list the type of plants that your bees are commonly foraging for the honey. I'll say that I had some blue bonnets, mesquite blossoms, and prairie wildflowers. You can give a little description of those plants if you'd like, give more context. Texas prairies come alive with blue bonnets, mesquite blossoms, and a mix of wildflowers to give this honey its bright, fresh character. And then here I can give some descriptions of my honey as well. Just saying that it's light golden, has some floral notes, has a citrus. Uh, and then some flavor tags. If you have specific flavors that you note from your honey, we'd absolutely love if you highlight those. So I'll put those in here as well. So bright, floral, citrusy, fresh. Here I can add some photos. I'm gonna put some of my actual honey, and then some of the plants that the bees are foraging. So I'll put a picture of the mesquite blossom, and I'll put some wildflowers as well. Now I can hit save, change were saved, and that's great. And so if I had any records, or you can add records right now that if you want to show, like we mentioned before, if you have any honey harvest records, if you have any inspection records, if you have document floor records, pictures of these actual plants that you were harvesting, you can obviously showcase them here. And so we're almost done just as a quick walkthrough. And then once you're ready, you can go ahead and hit publish. Once it's published, it's up, which is great. So one of the best features we mentioned before is the QR code feature. You can simply press this QR code button, and there you go. You hit download, you can share it, print it, do whatever you like. Someone just has to take out their phone, take out their camera, scan that QR code, and it'll be brought to your honey story page, which is fantastic. If you'd also like to manually share the link yourself, under this blue highlighted section, you can right click and copy the link and share it if you'd like. So if you want to see what the visual would be from other people, you can press the blue link here, and kind of this is the overview. So it takes the first picture you put in. My first picture was one of my apiaries. That'll be my background. The next picture I had was of harvesting the honey. So that's what's going to be there. And it has all this information that I just put in. So information about the whole story, my location, my number of hives, my type of honey. As you keep going, it has my notes about the honey, it has my notes about the plants. Again, it shows my location. If I had records here, it'd show in the album. So as we saw with James's earlier, if you have way more details, you can absolutely put those, make them more fleshed out. This was just a quick run through of the honey story. And I have a few more examples just to show some different honey stories, if they'll show. Okay, well, that's the one on this account. But as you understand, you get the idea. You can go back here at any time. If you'd like to delete or change any of these, you can press it and then hit this trash can. Or like I said, you can go back to it by pressing the name of the honey story and then hitting this pencil button to edit. Make sure that you hit update once you're done editing, and that will make sure that all of those changes save for your honey story.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lol. A couple of questions coming in already. But as you can see, the use cases are kind of endless. There's so many opportunities there to tailor it to suit whatever harvests you're working on and whatever your business or operations or family farm looks like. So give it a go. The free trial is there. We also have a special promo code as well to extend the opportunity to experience Pro, and it's a fantastic time to do so. So maybe, James, did
Yeah.
you want to answer some questions?
Sure. Yeah. We've had some good questions and been engaging over there with that as well. And thanks, Lowell. And I don't know if you got your phone out real quick and hit that QR code that he just created. It went to the page, which you're seeing
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, if
And
you
and
scan
so
this, I believe you
there you
should
go.
be brought to it yourself and see that just pops up right away.
Unless you're watching on your phone, then it's hard to do the QR
Yeah.
code while you're watching. I haven't figured that one out yet. But anyway, um, yeah. So. Check it out. And I see Lynn seems to be our power user in the chat with the honey story and apparently with winning blue ribbons and wants to go back and add that on your honey story. Absolutely. Just go back and edit it, add those pictures, that sort of thing um, to that. All right. Um, I'm going to go ahead, Danny, and answer this one, Marco's question
Okay.
on identifying foraging sources. And it reminded me, I just saw, and this came out in Catch the Buzz. Maybe if you get that from Bee Culture, a new book that South Carolina just put out on foraging sources and seasonal variety of forage across the state of South Carolina. They just released a book for South Carolina, um, and it looks super interesting. They did pollen sampling across the state throughout the season, which was really cool. And so that's kind of an organized version of what you're asking, right? And so that has happened over time, and that is a most recent example of South Carolina, somebody deciding we're going to do this kind of collectively. But it's something that you do as an individual beekeeper every year yourself. I mean, you watch what's blooming, when it's blooming, you see what shows up in your supers, you taste it, you see the color. Okay, so all those pieces you get experience with season after season. And what you'll see if you're a new beekeeper, you're like, wow, how do I know? Well, it turns out that it is pretty regular, season after season, what that's going to look like. There's going to be variations. But where your location is, if you think about it, you've got a 2 to 3 mile radius of what's blooming in that area, the nectar sources. And unless it's agriculture or some kind of fleeting annual bloom. It's going to be a pretty regular bloom pattern. It's going to change with the weather and the climate, but what's there is going to be pretty steady over time. So two things. One, you learn it from experience. Number two, you learn it from your fellow beekeepers. So that's it argues for you talking to the beekeepers in your area, understanding when those flows are, and so being part of your club or having friends that are beekeeping, and again, keeping records. When do things bloom? When do they begin blooming? When do they end? When does the nectar flow hit my hives? All those pieces are, again, data points that you need to learn and that you will learn just by default as a beekeeper. You're going to learn those pieces. Okay, so identifying what they are, again, there's plenty of tools to identify the flowers. Some of those are baked into the hive tracks right now. You can, take a picture of a flower and we'll send it to try to identify it. And so again, there's a lot of tools available for doing that. There's resources like this book that just came out. And I'll also say, give you a heads up for something that we've been thinking about for a while, and Lowell's been working on this, is a blooming calendar. Okay, and you will find these. They're also produced kind of at state levels. I know North Carolina has had this calendar for ages that says this is what's blooming, in the coastal region, in the Piedmont, in the mountains, during this window of time. People have documented this, and again, whether it's individual beekeepers, a beekeeping club, or some sort of organization, and so it seems obvious that in a digital age we should be able to aggregate all that together and give you a unique snapshot of what's the blooming calendar in your area. You'll see we've got some of that in there already. We have this little thing that says what's blooming in your area, and it's kind of on this meta level of data sources that we've accumulated and curated, and that's going to continue. And with the AI tools we have now and just the mashup of all the data sources, that's becoming easier. And I think you're going to see that coming out, in the future, definitely within the HiveTrax universe. And just in general, it's something that you can lean on kind of digital resources for that. So that's a long answer to that question, but yeah. All right. Danny, we might have some questions on the slide,
Yeah,
and
I
give
think we
give
can pop to
give
some
them
on
the
this
code.
slide. Okay, maybe we have time for um one or so out of here. James, if you want to pick.
Yeah, yeah. Let me pick one. Some of those, like recipe for oxalic acid, go look at the online for the right places for that. Randy Oliver or others. Um, and that one, any concern that not enough room in the brood chamber, that's the one I covered. That make sure you have space for the queen to lay. That's super important. The one, what's the best way to keep hives warm during the cold winter months? And how much food should I provide for them? Well, you are not going to keep your hives warm. The bees are going to keep their hives warm. I'm not being a smart aleck. It's the bees that are going to keep it warm. So your job is to make sure that they're healthy, well fed, and that they have a dry space. That's pretty much the requirements for them to survive the winter. The honeybees themselves are very good at thermoregulation and survive just fine if all those elements are there. If they're healthy, they have plenty of bees in the colony heading into winter, and they've got food stores. And if they have those, then they're going to be okay. So your job as a beekeeper is to make sure they have those. Now, depending on the how far north you are, my friends in Saskatchewan and Canada, they do wrap their hives. They kind of push them up on a pallet. This is commercial level. So they push them together on a pallet, wrap them, put a little piece of plywood or something over the top, because those things are almost completely buried in snow by the end of the year. But that's a bit extreme. In most places, just again, dry space, good food, and healthy bees. And as far as food goes, again, that depends on how long your winter is and how much the bees are having to consume. but somewhere in the 40 to 50 pound range is typical kind of average, and that's even probably a little bit high for where we are in this area. All right.